Part 64. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 631. After hearing what Suyuyan said, Ye Lengshuang looked at Suyuyan half-believingly, and then whispered in Suyuyan's ear. Let's not talk about other things for now. How sure are you? If you mess up this matter, we will be the ones who are unlucky. Ye Lengshuang's voice even trembled slightly, and there was a bit of complexity in the corners of her eyes and eyebrows. After a while, the smile on Suyuyan's mouth became more and more obvious. She just coughed lightly. What are you afraid of? Believe me, it's okay. At this time, Lin Yu was watching the two women whispering there, and suddenly had a bad premonition in his heart. After all, for Lin Yu, Suyuyan was really weird, eccentric, and mentally extraordinary. Especially Lin Yu, he felt that he couldn't resist Suyuyan. At this time, Suyuyan just stared at Lin Yu with a smile on her face, and the playfulness in her eyes was even more obvious. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu also coughed lightly. Ahem, okay, since you said you want to go, then I can agree to it, it's nothing. Lin Yu said slowly, his eyes staring straight at Suyuyan, and the playfulness at the corner of his mouth was even more obvious. At this time, Suyuyan also nodded lightly. Yes, if that's the case, then you have nothing to do today, you go back first. At this time, Lin Yu also nodded lightly. Without saying anything, he turned around and walked towards the back. Suyuyan's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's back, and the smile on her lips became more and more obvious. Under normal circumstances, based on Ye Lengshuang's understanding of Suyuyan, Suyuyan's smile meant that the person was going to be unlucky. After a while, Lin Yu began to wonder why Suyuyan did this, but after thinking for a long time, he couldn't figure out what Suyuyan's purpose was. On the way back, Lin Yu saw Murong Changa. After seeing Lin Yu, Murong Changa was extremely jealous. After all, if it wasn't for Lin Yu, De Guqinghong, who came to mess things up, De Guqinghong should have become his plaything. And once De Guqinghong became his plaything, the old man in the Dugu family would definitely support him. After seeing this scene, Murong Changa's face instantly became ugly. His eyes flashed with a bit of gloom, and his brows seemed to be twisted together. When Lin Yu saw Murong Changa at this time, he even sneered. He slowly walked towards Murong Changa, like a winner, looking down at Murong Changa from a high position. Oh, isn't this Murong Changa? Why are you here in our battle academy? You are not still thinking of using some crooked means to pursue women. But be careful, it will be bad if you encounter a honey trap one day. Lin Yu's smile began to become more and more obvious. At this time, Murong Changa heard what Lin Yu said, and his fists clenched and the cold aura on his body was released without reservation. His eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. Boy, stop arguing with me here. I will make you pay the price sooner or later. After hearing what Murong Changa said, Lin Yu just looked at Murong Changa with a smile on his face. His eyes were full of contempt. He obviously didn't take Murong Changa seriously at this moment. He just waved his hand casually, and then shook his head slightly. Really? Then you really scared me. I was almost scared to death by you. If you scared me to death, then next time you use those despicable means, maybe no one can stop you. Lin Yu slowly passed Murong Changa. Murong Changa was so angry that his teeth were itching. At this time, his eyes were full of gloom. After waiting for a while, Ye Lengshuang slowly walked out of the dean's office, and then walked straight to Murong Changa. Ye Lengshuang's eyes flashed with confusion, and then he frowned slightly, and then spoke in a low voice. What's wrong? What happened? Ye Lengshuang's eyes were fixed on Murong Changa. At this time, Murong Changa came back to his senses after hearing Ye Lengshuang's voice. He turned his head and looked at Ye Lengshuang, and then smiled. Nothing, nothing. At this time, Ye Langshuang heard Murong Changa say this, and for some reason, she always felt that Murong Changa must be hiding something from her, and then she looked in the direction where Lin Yu left. Do you two have any grudges? To say that Langshuang's insight is indeed unique. After hearing what Langshuang said, Murong Changa just waved his hand casually, and then smiled. Nothing, how could there be any grudges between him and me, silly girl, you think too much. Murong Changa said softly, and the smile on the corner of her mouth became more obvious. But at this time, Langshuang obviously did not believe what Murong Changa said. Langshuang's eyes were fixed on Murong Changa, and the smile on the corner of her mouth became more obvious. Okay, but where are we going today? I remember there is a grassland outside the west of the city. How about we go there to ride horses? At this time, all this happened to be seen by Lin Yu. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's face couldn't help but condense slightly, and then he sighed faintly. Alas, such a good woman, it's a pity that she is blind. Why did she find such a guy? Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 632. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly felt that there were several different breaths, which seemed to be spying on him. Those breaths were very annoying. When Lin Yu felt those breaths from different places spying on him, his face instantly became gloomy. Lin Yu's mouth corners even raised a sneer, and a few gloomy meanings flashed across his face, and the murderous aura on his body was even more obvious. At this moment, the corners of Lin Yu's mouth only raised a trace of evil confusion, and a few playful flashes flashed in his eyes. Interesting, it's really interesting. There is a road to heaven, but you don't take it. There is no door to hell, and you come to surrender. In this case, don't blame me for being rude to you. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he walked forward, and then the two masked men saw Lin Yu leave, and then they hurriedly chased after Lin Yu. Lin Yu deliberately led them to a remote place. Wherever it was remote, Lin Yu would lead them there. Those people then realized that something was wrong. At this time, one of the masked men turned around and looked at his eldest brother, and then said softly, "Brother, I think this matter seems to be a little strange. Look at the route of this young man. Where does he want to go?" At this time, one of them half closed his eyes, and then gently touched his chin. The corners of his mouth even raised a few sneers, and his eyes were quite gloomy. Who knows what this kid wants to do? But no matter what tricks this kid wants to play, let's just go ahead today. Don't be afraid, I can take care of you. The leader said in a cold voice, with a gloomy look in his eyes, and a bit of murderous aura flashed on his body. At this time, the people around him nodded and smiled after hearing what their boss said. I knew you would have a way, boss. If that's the case, then the brothers can rest easy. The leader seemed to have remembered something. Keep an eye on this kid and don't let him out of our sight, otherwise it will be troublesome. At this time, those people nodded heavily, and then they followed him outside. Lin Yu deliberately led them to the north of the city. When everyone came to the north of the city, Lin Yu suddenly stopped, and the sneer on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. When those people saw Lin Yu stopped, they suddenly had a bad premonition in their hearts, but at this time they did not expose themselves, but continued to follow Lin Yu silently. At this moment, Lin Yu turned his head and glanced at the back of him, and then waved his hand gently. Those who should come out should come out. What's the point of hiding like this? Lin Yu's voice was not loud, but everyone could hear it clearly. However, although Lin Yu said so at this time, no one had the slightest intention of coming out. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with a bit of gloom, and the murderous aura on his body became more and more obvious. At this time, he summoned the Eternal Thunder Dragon without saying a word. This Eternal Thunder Dragon has been suppressed for these days, and naturally it is in urgent need of venting. After the Eternal Thunder Dragon was summoned, it also let out an angry roar. That deafening sound simply hit everyone's soul. After seeing the eternal thunder dragon, everyone's eyes and eyebrows were full of fear. At this time, they looked at each other. You look at me, I look at you, and there is a look of disbelief in their eyes. How is it possible? This is the legendary eternal thunder dragon? How did this kid get this eternal thunder dragon? At this time, the voices of those people were even trembling. At this time, Lin Yu's smile became more and more obvious, his eyes were full of mockery, and the murderous aura on his body was revealed at this time. Interesting, it's really interesting, don't you come out? If you don't come out, don't blame me for being rude to you. Lin Yu's voice suddenly became cold. After hearing what Lin Yu said, everyone's face instantly became ugly, and the murderous aura on their bodies was even more obvious. A bloody killing intention began to gradually spread, and that bloody killing intention made everyone feel a chill. After a while, Lin Yu's eyes stared straight at them, and his eyes and eyebrows were full of a gloomy color. Why? You've been following me for so long. What's your purpose? Tell me. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly smiled, his smile was very obvious, and his eyes were full of pity when he looked at everyone. After hearing what Lin Yu said, everyone's eyes flashed a bit of coldness, and then they suddenly took a step forward, and the murderous aura on their bodies became more and more obvious. Boy, there is nothing to say. Since you found us today, we will directly explain our intentions to you. Our boss wants to meet you and talk to you about things. What do you think? The man may not really feel the pressure of the eternal thunder dragon. After all, Lin Yu was afraid of alarming the people in the city, so he deliberately concealed the pressure of the eternal thunder dragon. So the leader was so arrogant. At this time, Lin Yu couldn't help laughing after hearing what the man said. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to be completely crazy. After the man saw Lin Yu like this, the murderous intent in his body began to gradually spread. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 633. Boy. Are you going or not? Just tell me. If you go, you will be our guest. But if you don't go. Lin Yu heard this. After the man said this, he suddenly laughed. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to have heard the funniest joke in the world. He laughed wildly and could not recover for a long time. Come on, Lin Yu was laughing so hard at this moment. Ha 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 ha, interesting, really interesting. I have seen a lot of ignorant people, but this is the first time I have encountered such an ignorant and fearless guy like you, so now I am thinking, in the end how should I break your bones bit by bit? Lin Yu's voice began to become more and more gloomy. The blood-killing energy in his body was released without reservation at this moment. A bit of gloominess flashed in his eyes. A cold aura made the man at this moment feel like a small boat in the sea, swaying unsteadily. At this time, after the man felt the blood-killing aura in Lin Yu's body, he was instantly shocked and stunned. At this time, he couldn't help but sucked in a breath of cold air, and his eyes were even more, it was so firmly nailed to Lin Yu. How is it possible? The information does not say that your red-trained yellow sand beast is only at the epic level now, but how could your strength be so terrifying? How is this possible? How is this possible? Now the man was even a bit hysterical. His eyes looking at Lin Yu were full of fear, and his eyes were full of panic. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly smiled. He stared at the man with a smile on his face, his eyes full of contempt and indifference. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to be the lord of all things who dominated the world and the sky. When he looked at the man, there was no sympathy in his eyes, only a trace of pity. You are ridiculous and pathetic. Now I can give you a chance, a chance to live. Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly, his eyes completely filled with coldness. At this time, the man heard Lin Yu. After saying this, his heart was filled with fear. He subconsciously took a few steps back, his eyes fixed on Lin Yu's body. "You, what exactly do you want to do?" As for the people behind the man, their eyes looking at Lin Yu were full of fear. They kept moving towards him and retreated like this crazily. At this time, Lin Yu looked indifferent. "Don't worry, I won't kill you all directly. I will leave one person to inform you. If you are lucky enough, whoever will be the last person standing on the field, I'll let him go." Everyone just looked at each other in confusion. The highest talent of these guys was only the chaos level. The pressure emanating from the god level beasts was simply not something that ordinary people could withstand. These people's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and the fear on their bodies gradually became more obvious. At this moment, they were so crazy, retreating backwards. After seeing them like this, Lin Yu just felt a little ridiculous. At this time, Lin Yu also gently spread his hands. "What? No one wants to take action? Or do you need me to help you?" Lin Yu glanced towards them with a smile on his face, his eyes filled with a kind of indifference, and the murderous aura in his body gradually began to spread. Those people swallowed their saliva like this crazily, and then looked at their companions. I don't know who suddenly summoned the beast, and it attacked the person next to him like this crazily. Then a scream was heard immediately, and the last person became so direct that he fell to the ground. Then, those people also looked at their companions one after another. These people seemed like executioners from hell, slaughtering their companions one after another, and there was no trace of mercy in their eyes. There is only endless indifference. After waiting for a while, those people fell down one after another. After the leader saw this scene, he started shouting and roaring desperately around him. "Don't be like this, don't be like this, this guy just wants us to kill each other, we can't do this, we must not do this." At this time, the man's voice was even a little hysterical. The man started roaring and screaming as hard as he could. But no one listened to him, and some people even started to look at this person. His eyes were fixed on this person, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. "Brother, I'm sorry." At this time, someone among them heard a roar. "We matchmakers are Big Brother's rivals, so now we have to get rid of Big Brother first, otherwise we will kill each other, and in the end only Big Brother will survive." After the man said this, everyone looked at the leader. When the leader saw this scene, he couldn't help but panic in his heart. He subconsciously took a few steps back and stared at the people around him. "Don't do this, don't do this. You are completely trapped by him. We should unite now. We..." Before he finished speaking, he saw a man rushing towards him. The man's speed was extremely fast. He came to him in just one breath. Then he saw a long knife slashing towards his neck. The long knife cut through the sky, making a sonic boom, and chopped directly towards his face. At this time, Wang Guililong and Lin Yu were watching silently on the side. Wang Guililong looked at Lin Yu unhappily and said coldly in the end, "So you called me out just to watch this good show? I want to have a taste of it." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 634. At this time, Eternal Thunder Dragon's brows seemed to be together. His eyes looking at Lin Yu were full of helplessness, and there was a bit of a wry smile at the corner of his mouth. At this time, Lin Yu heard Eternal Thunder Dragon. After saying this, he couldn't help but cough lightly, and then waved his hand casually. "Trust me, you don't want to do that." Eternal Thunder Dragon was naturally speechless for a while at this moment. "Don't you think what you are doing now seems a bit despicable?" After Lin Yu heard what the Eternal Thunder Dragon said, he was slightly stunned at first, but after pondering for a moment, he smiled. I really don't think about what you said. 3 black lines suddenly appeared on the forehead of Eternal Thunder Dragon. But I think it's a bit despicable for you to do this. You shouldn't be like this. The Eternal Thunder Dragon's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and there was a bit of complexity in his eyes, and then he sighed softly. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Eternal Thunder Dragon said, he suddenly smiled. Ha ha ha, it's just taking advantage of human nature. I don't think I need to say more about such a simple question. It's because of their human nature, so you can't really blame me for this. Lin Yu just spoke softly and unhurriedly, the smile on the corner of his mouth was even more obvious, and he turned his head with a bit of playfulness in his eyes staring straight at this eternity. On the Brontosaurus. The Eternal Thunder Dragon just sighed faintly, and then shook his head helplessly, and then rolled his eyes at Lin Yu with such an annoyed look. Anyway, you are right about all this. What can I say? But these guys are really stupid. I didn't expect to be manipulated by you so easily. The Eternal Thunder Dragon said coldly, and then glanced at Lin Yu, with a somewhat complicated meaning in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu just waved his hand gently, with a teasing smile at the corner of his mouth, and then coughed lightly. Ahem, you can't say that. No, what I did in this matter is indeed a bit despicable, but you should also know that these are the human heart, and the human heart is what it is. As the saying goes, the human heart is not enough, the snake swallows the elephant, isn't it? That's the truth. Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly like this, with a bit of amusement in his eyes, and the smile at the corner of his mouth was even more obvious. After Eternal Thunder Dragon heard Lin Yu say this, he was a little stunned. He pondered for a moment, and after a long time, he couldn't even say a word. Then he shook his head helplessly and sighed quietly. Take a breath. Oh, there's really nothing we can do against you. Finally, the group of people rushed directly towards them. The leader of the group showed a fierce look on his face, turned his head towards the crowd, and just glanced coldly, his eyes full of its gloomy murderous aura. Assholes, you bastards deserve to be damned. I think you are just a little impatient with life. The leader said almost as if he was gritting his teeth, and the murderous aura in his body became more and more obvious. After the people around heard what the leader said, they just turned their heads, glanced coldly at the corner of their mouths, and even raised a somewhat contemptuous smile, and then followed. Then he waved his hand casually. Who do you think you are? It's not because of your dereliction of duty that you put us in danger now. Now you have the nerve to talk nonsense here. You are really shameless. Those people's eyes were fixed on the leader. After the leading man saw this scene, the blood-killing aura in his body gradually began to spread at this moment, and the terrifying aura gradually began to become obvious. Okay, very good, very good. Since you are seeking death, you will be really embarrassed if it doesn't happen today. Be good and accept death. After hearing what the leader said, a monster with 5 heads, a wolf body, and eagle wings suddenly appeared behind him. Suddenly appeared in front of everyone. The leader of the group was in the epic realm. The overwhelming blood flow from the strong man in the epic realm made everyone feel trembling in their hearts. At this time, the people around him couldn't help but look at each other after hearing what he said, and then they looked at each other, their eyes fixed on the leader, his face it's quite a bit gloomy. After seeing this scene, the leader's smile began to become more and more ferocious, and his eyes were filled with a gloomy murderous aura. Ha ha ha, today I want to see how powerful you are. Anyone who has the ability should use it quickly. At this time, the leader's eyes were full of ferocity when he looked at everyone. At this time, his eyes were full of gloomy murderous intent. At this moment, I saw a person. There was a gloomy look in that person's eyes, and the blood-killing aura in his body was released without any reservation. At this moment, I saw that person. The man suddenly took a step forward, and then said in a cold voice. Okay, Today I want to see how capable you are. Today I really don't believe how powerful you are. At this moment, the murderous aura in that person was released without reservation. The gloomy aura made everyone feel shuddering even at this moment. At this time, even Lin Yu couldn't help but smack his tongue after feeling the aura on that guy's body. The smile at the corner of his mouth gradually became more obvious, and his eyes were quite full. It's a bit playful. Interesting, really interesting. I didn't expect this guy to look like that. Lin Yu said softly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 635. At this time, Eternal Thunder Dragon, who was next to Lin Yu, couldn't help but nodded slightly after hearing what Lin Yu said. The smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and his eyes there is quite a bit of playfulness in it. That's right, and the alien beast on that little guy is also extraordinary. The alien beast on that little guy is a mutated alien beast. It should also have ancient bloodline. It seems to be a ghost bear. The Eternal Thunder Dragon spoke softly and unhurriedly, the smile at the corner of his mouth gradually became more obvious, and there was a bit of playfulness in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu gently touched his chin, turned his head towards Eternal Thunder Dragon, glanced at it casually, and then sighed quietly. Oh, it's a pity that it is only at the epic level now. It will be difficult to upgrade this mutant beast to the chaos level. After the Eternal Thunder Dragon heard what Lin Yu said, it also stared at Lin Yu with a smile on its face, and said the last part unhurriedly. With your current resources, are you afraid of this? I don't think so. Eternal Thunder Dragon said softly, and then stared directly at Lin Yu, with a bit of teasing in his eyes, and a somewhat meaningful smile at the corner of his mouth. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Eternal Thunder Dragon said, his face couldn't help but smile slightly. The smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious, and then it became like this. He spoke softly and unhurriedly. Maybe what you said is true. According to the current situation, can I take this little guy for my own use now? Lin Yu whispered like this, and finally his eyes were fixed on the Eternal Thunder Dragon. The smile on the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious, and there was quite a bit of emotion in his eyes. The playful look. The Eternal Thunder Dragon just coughed lightly, then waved his hand casually, and then spoke softly. Of course, but everything now depends on your own wishes. If you are willing, there is no problem with this. The Eternal Thunder Dragon spoke softly and unhurriedly, with a bit of amusement in its eyes. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu seemed to have remembered something, and finally turned his head and glanced towards Eternal Thunder Dragon. In that case, let's do something fun. After Eternal Thunder Dragon heard what Lin Yu said, his eyes were quite complicated, and then he coughed lightly. Ahem, then you want to do something interesting. Even if it is a test for this little guy, if this little guy can really win, then I will slowly train him in the future. At this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon heard Lin Yu, and after saying this, he just smiled like this. What if this little guy fails when the time comes? After Lin Yu heard what the Eternal Thunder Dragon said, he turned around and rolled his eyes at the Eternal Thunder Dragon angrily, and then waved his hand casually. It's very simple. If this little guy fails, then it will only prove that this little guy is unlucky, so he can't blame others. Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly like this, the smile at the corner of his mouth becoming more and more obvious, and there was a bit of playfulness in his eyes. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the Eternal Thunder Dragon couldn't help but cough lightly, and then turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu in annoyance. One glance. All right. And at this moment, the man suddenly took a step forward, and then immediately behind him, the nether bear opened its bloody mouth and rushed toward the 5 demon wolves. After the 5 demon wolves saw the nether bear, their expressions suddenly became so dark, and then they let out an angry roar. The angry roar resounded through the sky, just with every breath. Suddenly, everyone's hearts could not help but tremble. That terrifying aura made everyone's hearts condense. When that aura bloomed, everyone's souls couldn't help but tremble slightly. When the Nether Bear saw the 5 demon wolves, after seeing the momentum displayed on his body at this moment, it seemed that he was not afraid at all. Instead, he suddenly moved straight towards the 5 demon wolves. Come rushing. At this time, the young man's eyes were full of perseverance. The young man just stared at their leader with a smile on his face, a look of determination between his eyebrows, and the corner of his mouth. The smile gradually became more obvious. Ha 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 ha, although your strength is indeed not weak, it is still a little bit behind after all. The young man just said in a cold voice, with a bit of contempt in his eyes, and the smile on the corner of his mouth was even more obvious, and then he waved his hand casually. At this time, the leader saw the smile on the boy's face, and his face sank slightly. At this moment, he just took a deep breath and then shook his head. No, no, I will make you realize how ignorant you are in a moment. The leader's eyes were fixed on the boy, with a bit of contempt between his eyebrows, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, the boy just shook his head after hearing what the leader said, and then sighed. Alas, maybe not, maybe you can really let me see your strength, but maybe you can't. The boy just said so coldly, and the gloomy aura on his body made everyone feel a chill. After the leader felt the terrifying aura of the boy, his face became slightly ugly. Really? Little guy, are you sure it's really like this? At this time, the leader suddenly smiled like this, and the smile seemed a little weird. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 636. At this time, after seeing the strange smile on the leader's face, the boy's face could not help but slightly condense, and then he glanced coldly at the leader, with a bit of gloom in his eyes. I think it should be like this, what do you think? The boy said slowly and solemnly, and the smile on the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this moment, the boy just took a step forward, but the momentum on his body was already revealed. The blood-colored aura made everyone's soul tremble slightly. At this time, even the leader had to admit that the blood-colored aura on the boy was indeed a bit scary, and it was so scary that it could not be described in words. The leader was also full of fear at this time, and at this time he subconsciously took a few steps back. At this moment, the Nether Bear stood up more and more courageously, and then suddenly flew forward, and then pounced directly on the 5 demon wolves. The head of one of the 5 demon wolves was actually torn apart by the Nether Bear. The Nether Bear let out an angry roar, and it seemed that it was really angry. When the leader saw this scene, his face suddenly condensed, and the bloody murderous aura on his body was released without reservation at this moment. Boy, if I don't kill you today, it will be difficult to eliminate the hatred in my heart. At this time, after the leader finished speaking, he suddenly made a seal with his hands, bit his tongue, and then sprayed a mouthful of blood from his tongue. The blood sprinkled on the sky, and in just an instant, it dyed the entire sky red, which looked particularly charming. At this time, the leader's face was slightly pale, but there was a bit of unwillingness between his eyebrows. At this time, the leader's mouth corners forced out a little smile. No matter what, I will kill you. The leader's lips were pale for a while, and at this time, the smile on his face became more and more obvious. There was a bit of mockery in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows, and a bit of sneer at the corners of his mouth. At this time, the young man seemed to have sensed the horror and terror of the leader. His eyes were fixed on the leader, his fists were clenched tightly, and the blood in his body began to gradually churn. "It seems that you really want to die." The young man's voice was even a little cold, and the blood-colored breath began to spread gradually. When the blood-colored breath spread, the leader was not afraid at all, but laughed up to the sky. "Ha ha ha, little guy, let's not talk about other things for now. How much do you think you have to win?" The leader's voice was a little cold, and his face was a little gloomy. The sneer at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. His eyes were fixed on the boy, and he seemed to be quite amused. At this time, the boy just took a step forward suddenly, and the strong aura crossed the sky. Everyone seemed to feel the firmness in the boy's eyes. "You shouldn't do this." The boy's voice trembled slightly, and his face was full of gloom. The bloody aura on his body made everyone feel the boy's indestructible will. At this time, after realizing the boy's terrible state, the leader's face couldn't help but tighten slightly, and then he subconsciously stepped back a few steps. "So what?" The leader stared at the boy with a mocking look in his eyes. The boy laughed at this time. "Ha ha ha, nothing, so." The contempt in the boy's eyes gradually became more obvious, and at this moment the boy's eyes gradually became gloomy. The leader felt the coldness in the boy's eyes, and his mind couldn't help but tremble slightly. "It seems that you are determined to die." The leader suddenly spoke at this time, his eyes fixed on the boy. At this time, the young man just nodded slightly. "That's right, living towards death, this has always been my principle." The corner of the leader's mouth just raised a little bit of sneer, and then he snorted coldly, "Humph, ridiculous principle." After hearing what the leader said, the young man suddenly took a step forward, and the blood on his body gradually began to spread around him. "But I don't think there is anything ridiculous about my principles." At this time, the murderous aura on the young man began to be released without reservation. He just slowly approached the leader, and the blood on his body crushed the leader's will bit by bit. Although there was a level difference at this time, the nether bear was fearless, but the fierceness of the nether bear formed a very sharp contrast with the young man's petite body. The amount of blood in that young man made everyone feel a little shuddering. Even Lin Yu, who was standing by, felt that this young man seemed a bit scary. The eyes of the Eternal Thunder Dragon were full of approval. At this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon nodded gently, and the smile at the corner of its mouth gradually spread. "Yes, I really like this little guy. He looks quite interesting." The Eternal Thunder Dragon was talking calmly and coldly from the side. From the contempt and disdain at the beginning, it finally turned into what it is now, which looked a bit interesting. After Lin Yu heard what the Eternal Thunder Dragon said, he just turned his head and glanced at the Eternal Thunder Dragon, and then waved it casually. "This little guy is really interesting, but I think you haven't discovered what's really interesting about him yet." Lin Yu just spoke softly and unhurriedly. The smile on the corner of his mouth gradually became more obvious, and there was a bit of amusement in his eyes. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 637. After the Eternal Thunder Dragon saw Lin Yu's expression, he didn't know why, but there was always an urge to beat him up in his heart. At this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon stared at Lin Yu, and then immediately he snorted so coldly. "Humph, I'm giving you a friendly reminder. I advise you not to have too many evil thoughts about this little guy." The Eternal Thunder Dragon said softly and unhurriedly, and then turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu. The smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. "Got up." After Lin Yu heard what the Eternal Thunder Dragon said, he turned his head and glanced at the Eternal Thunder Dragon, and then waved his hand casually. Go, where did you come from? Where are you going? You don't have to worry about what I want." At this time, Lin Yu spoke directly and coldly, not even the slightest bit polite to the Eternal Thunder Dragon. After seeing this scene, the Eternal Thunder Dragon felt like crying for a while, and there was quite a bit of helplessness in the corners of his eyes and brows. Alas, why did I choose you as my master in the first place? Alas! The eternal thunder dragon just sighed one after another. After hearing the sigh of eternal thunder dragon, Lin Yu just turned his head and glared at eternal thunder dragon angrily, and then said in a cold voice, "What? It sounds like you are a little unconvinced by this." Lin Yu's voice was unusually cold, and the roiling blood in his body gave the eternal thunder dragon a strong sense of oppression, making it true that the eternal thunder dragon did not dare to make mistakes. This eternal thunder dragon shook its head like a chicken pecking at rice. No, of course not. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly smiled. He stared at the eternal thunder dragon with a smile on his face, and there was quite a bit of ridicule in the corners of his eyes and brows. "Oh, if it's not, then what is it?" Lin Yu just said this coldly, and then he became so angry that he glared at eternal thunder dragon so viciously. At this time, the eternal thunder dragon just coughed lightly, "Ahem, actually. After a moment, Lin Yu just waved his hand casually, "Forget it, no need to act like this. This little guy seems to be in trouble now." After hearing Lin Yu's reminder, the eternal thunder dragon glanced at the battlefield. At this time, he saw a stream of blood energy emanating from the 5 demon wolves. The blood energy rushed straight into the sky, even in the sky. They all smelled the smell of blood. Everyone knows that their leader is strong, but everyone has never seen their leader possess such strength, because on weekdays, the leader is not impressive at all, and no one can look down on him at all. Nothing unusual. But in today's world, the leader of his family has become so strong that everyone can't help but tremble. After retreating for a long time, they can barely stabilize their body. There was no fighting spirit in these people. At this moment, they were just thinking about how to protect themselves and how to escape. At this time, they took a deep breath and calmed down a little. What should be done? What should be done? These guys are too scary, this. Everyone couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. At this time, they looked at each other, with a kind of fear in the corners of their eyes and brows, and a bit of a bitter smile on the corners of their mouths. And at this moment, I heard the leader, looking up to the sky, laughing wildly, as if he was completely crazy. His eyes showed a blood-red color, and he stared at everyone's eyes. The bloody murderous aura on his body made everyone feel shuddering. "Ha ha ha, aren't you very powerful? Today I want to see how powerful you are." The leader was slightly hoarse at this moment. He just glanced at the crowd, his eyes filled with a kind of gloominess. At this time, after everyone heard what the leader said, the panic in their hearts was beyond words. At this time, they subconsciously took a few steps back, and then immediately just looking at the leader with such vigilance, there was a gloomy meaning in the corners of his eyes and brows. Now it seems that the leader has made up his mind to fight us to death, so for now, we can only fight. All the people looked at each other like this, with a gloomy look in the corners of their eyes and brows. The blood-killing aura in their bodies began to gradually spread, and a cold aura easy things are revealed quietly like this. At this moment, the leader took a step straight forward, and then the bloody aura on his body gradually began to appear. At this moment, Xiaoran suddenly revealed the bloody aura. The killing intent made everyone feel a little shuddering. At this time, they continued to retreat back. But at this moment, the leader just took a step forward, and then his eyes were filled with a gloomy look, and the blood-killing intention on his body was unreservedly revealed. When he came out, that bloody pressure made everyone's expressions freeze. Just between exhaling and inhaling, just in this brief moment, that mysterious aura made everyone's souls begin to tremble gradually. "Boy, I will let you know what the real price is, and I will also let you experience what the real fear is." The leader's voice even trembled slightly. He suddenly took a step forward, and then a terrifying pressure on his body pressed straight on the man. After the man was pressed by this pressure, he instantly felt as if his body was about to be torn apart by force. At this time, he clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and said in his mouth he let out a muffled groan, and blood flowed out bit by bit along his body. The man's face was slightly pale. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 638. At this time, Lin Yu originally thought that this guy should have a sure chance of victory, but when Lin Yu saw this guy, who was still a little breathless under the powerful pressure, his expression began to change slightly. Some solidified. At this time, Lin Yu was gently stroking his chin, his eyes fixed on the little guy, and the smile at the corner of his mouth gradually appeared. It's interesting. I really think that this little guy has a bit of unyielding spirit. It's just a pity that this little guy is just a little bit behind. Lin Yu just gently rubbed his chin, and the smile on the corner of his mouth began to appear, so quietly released, and there was quite a bit of playfulness in his eyes. After Eternal Thunder Dragon heard what Lin Yu said, 3 black lines suddenly appeared on her forehead, and she was speechless for a while. At this time, she glared at Lin Yu angrily. You said you were planning to take him on as your disciple, but now that you're acting like this, it's obvious that you're just gloating about someone else's misfortune. Eternal Thunder Dragon whispered like this, looking quite dissatisfied. Lin Yu groped his chin, then turned his head and glanced at Eternal Thunder Dragon, and the smile at the corner of his mouth began to gradually appear. What? It seems like you are a little dissatisfied with me, right Xiaolong? Lin Yu just turned his head and glanced at Eternal Thunder Dragon. The smile at the corner of his mouth gradually appeared, and there was quite a bit of amusement in his eyes. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the Eternal Thunder Dragon couldn't help but waved his hands casually, and then spoke in a deep voice. Of course not, don't get me wrong. The Eternal Thunder Dragon just turned its head and glanced at Lin Yu. The perfect look in the corners of his eyes and brows began to become more and more obvious, and the corners of his mouth were even more raised. Smile. At this time, after Lin Yu saw the Eternal Thunder Dragon like this, he didn't know why he suddenly had a bad premonition in his heart. He turned his head and his eyes were fixed on the Eternal Thunder Dragon's face. The uneasy feeling in my body and heart began to become gradually more obvious. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu couldn't help but touch his chin so gently, and then began to recall what happened before. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes narrowed to a slit, and then the same thing happened. He coughed lightly. Ahem, you are really interesting. Lin Yu turned his head and stared directly at the Eternal Thunder Dragon. A bit of complexity flashed between his eyebrows, and the clear smile at the corner of his mouth gradually became more obvious. At this time, after Eternal Thunder Dragon heard what Lin Yu said, he didn't know why, but he always felt that Lin Yu seemed to be a little abnormal at this time. As for what was wrong, even he now felt that something was wrong. Some are unclear. Eternal Thunder Dragon just waved his hand casually, and then coughed lightly. Ahem, it's just a joke, don't take it seriously. Eternal Thunder Dragon just spoke softly and unhurriedly. At this time, Lin Yu turned his head and stared directly at the Eternal Thunder Dragon. His expression suddenly condensed, and then he stepped forward bit by bit. He was facing the Eternal Thunder Dragon, and the slight smile at the corner of his mouth gradually became more obvious. Really? But I always feel that there seems to be some problem with you. Although I don't know exactly what the problem is with you, it is just a feeling. Can you understand? Lin Yu just spoke softly and unhurriedly, then turned his head and glanced at the Eternal Thunder Dragon. At this time, his eyes widened with anger, and his eyes were fixed on the Eternal Thunder Dragon. On the dragon's body. After the Eternal Thunder Dragon felt some of the blood-killing aura in Lin Yu's body, his face instantly turned ugly, and then he coughed lightly and smiled. Ahem, stop joking, this kind of joke is not funny at all. The Eternal Thunder Dragon said softly, and then stared directly at Lin Yu, and then subconsciously took a few steps back. The blood energy in his body seemed to be coming from gradually it spread like this. At this time, Lin Yu half closed his eyes and stared directly at the eternal thunder dragon. Then he coughed lightly, and then waved his hand casually. Ahem, it's all up to you anyway, nothing else is important. I just hope you don't expose your ambition too obviously. Don't forget that besides the bones, there are many things buried under this yellow earth. Ambitious. Lin Yu just looked down at the eternal thunder dragon from a high position, with a rather gloomy look in his eyes, and a cold look between his brows. At this time, after the eternal thunder dragon felt the terrifying pressure on Lin Yu, his face instantly turned ugly, and then he took a deep breath and sighed slightly. Calm down your mood. I'm sorry. I apologize to you for my previous arrogance. I hope you don't mind, and I hope you don't take this little thing to your heart. The eternal thunder dragon turned its head, its eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and then it spoke softly, but there was something strange in the words. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the eternal thunder dragon, and the smile on the corner of his mouth gradually began to show. He was not a fool, and of course he understood this eternal thunder dragon. There must be something wrong with the thunder dragon looking like this, so at this moment, Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at the eternal thunder dragon, with quite a bit of amusement in his eyes. Really? This is in the hope that you won't be hostile to me as you said. Lin Yu just said this, his face couldn't help but twitch slightly, and then he turned his head, his eyes fixed on the eternal thunder dragon, with a bit of tenacious murderous aura in his body. A layer of cold sweat broke out on the forehead of eternal thunder dragon. At this time, the fear in his heart was simply self-evident. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 639. At this time, after Eternal Thunder Dragon felt the roiling blood in Lin Yu's body, his face couldn't help but gradually turned ugly, and then he took a deep breath and sighed slightly. Calm down your mood. I hope you won't take this matter to your heart, and I hope you can give me another chance. The Eternal Thunder Dragon stared straight at Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu seemed too lazy to argue with Eternal Thunder Dragon about this matter, so he just waved his hand impatiently, and then said coldly. It's just this once, it won't happen next time. If you let me know there will be a next time, I believe you will know it yourself without me telling you what price you will pay. Lin Yu just said this coldly, and then he stared at the Eternal Thunder Dragon with a smile on his face, and his eyes were quite playful. At this time, after the Eternal Thunder Dragon felt the cold breath on Lin Yu's body, his expression suddenly became ugly. At this time, he just took a deep breath, and then slightly a smile. Ha ha ha, no, of course not. Of course I know exactly what price it will cost. Eternal Thunder Dragon whispered, and then looked at Lin Yu with such a flattering look. At this time, Lin Yu had calmed down his mood slightly, and then he waved his hand casually and smiled slightly. Not bad, it's pretty good, but it's still fun for you. Although Lin Yu said he didn't mind, this was not the first time for Lin Yu. Lin Yu didn't like the feeling of his own people betraying him. So at this time, Lin Yu half closed his eyes, and then turned towards the Eternal Thunder Dragon, just casually glancing at it, but there was quite a bit of fear in his eyes. At this moment, after witnessing this scene, the Eternal Thunder Dragon naturally felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. A moment later, he also let out a long sigh of relief from the bottom of his heart. It's okay, it's okay. Eternal Thunder Dragon whispered like this, his brows relaxed somewhat, and the smile at the corner of his mouth gradually became more obvious. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu saw that some of the blood energy on the netherworld bear was gradually being devoured by the 5 demon wolves. Obviously, the 5 demon wolves could also see the blood on the netherworld bear. That bit of blood is so terrifying. After the 5 demon wolves saw this scene, they couldn't help but laugh loudly, and then their eyes were fixed on the netherworld bear in front of them. The smiling faces of the 5 demon wolves became more and more obvious, and there was a gloomy look between their brows. Ha 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 ha, you dare to fight me now? Although I don't know who gave you the courage, your courage is really ridiculous. The 5 demon wolves' voices were deafening, and then, the nether bear's body began to tremble so violently, and then the body shape changed and scattered, and that mysterious aura spread across the sky, making everyone felt that terrifying power. At this time, the 5 demon wolves looked quite content with their eyes and brows. The smile on their lips began to gradually spread out, and their eyes were filled with a decisive murderous intent. After seeing this scene, the nether bear was well aware of the gap between itself and the 5 demon wolves, so at this time, the nether bear's eyes had lost the color to continue fighting. Nether bear's eyes were full of helplessness. At this moment, the young man laughed loudly, and then flew directly forward with a violent and fierce force, which made everyone's souls start to become so crazy and tremble violently. And at this moment, the nether bear let out an angry roar, and then the whole world couldn't help but tremble so violently at this moment. That mysterious power made everyone's minds shake. I couldn't help but tremble at the same time. Almost in the same breath, the nether bear suddenly took a step forward, and then a blood-killing intention began to spread crazily. The intention to kill made everyone's souls begin to tremble violently. That meandering momentum made everyone's minds start to become so turbulent. At this moment, the corner of the young man's mouth only evoked a hint of a yuppie smile, and then he slowly raised his head, and then took a step straight forward. At this time, the murderous intention on the young man's body was unreservedly revealed at this moment. The cold murderous aura made everyone's hearts condense. At this moment they just subconsciously took a few steps back, with a bit of fear flashing in the corners of their eyes and brows. At this time, the smile on the corner of the young man's mouth gradually began to show. The young man had a smile on his face, and there was quite a bit of smile on the leader's eyes and brows. With a gloomy look, a bloody aura came out like this. After the leader felt the cold breath from the boy, his face even turned ugly. At this moment, the overwhelming momentum gradually spread, and then the leader's face instantly showed a hideous smile, which gradually emerged, making everyone's soul tremble. Little guy, let's not talk about other things today, I just want you to die, do you have any objection? The blood on the leader's body began to churn quietly, and everyone felt the cold blood-like breath on the leader's body, and their faces instantly turned ugly. The boy still looked indifferent, he just waved his hand casually, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth gradually spread out, the bloody killing intention on his body, and the unyielding momentum, as if he was going to fight with the sky and the earth. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 640. At this time, even Lin Yu, who was on the side, couldn't help being shocked and dumbfounded when he saw this scene. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the young man, and in the corners of his eyes and brows, there was a completely unbearable feeling. With an expression of confidence, he gently rubbed his chin at this time, and then shook his head like this. It's interesting. It's really interesting. Not only does this little guy seem to have extraordinary strength, but he also has a pretty good aura. I'm becoming more and more interested in this little guy today. Lin Yu just said softly, the smile on the corner of his mouth gradually became more obvious, and there was quite a bit of amusement in his eyes. At this moment, an erratic aura in the distance disappeared in a flash. When Lin Yu felt the aura in the distance, his face suddenly twisted, and then he subconsciously looked in that direction. He glanced at it, but when Lin Yu looked there again, there was nothing there. At this time, Lin Yu gently touched his chin. After pondering for a long time, he still had no idea what the guy who just floated past was. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly smiled. His smile became more and more unrestrained, and the smile at the corner of his mouth gradually became more obvious. Interesting, it's actually quite interesting. Lin Yu whispered like this, and then pondered for a while. Immediately afterwards, a breath from the distance came towards us, and that breath made everyone's souls even start to tremble slightly. Lin Yu suddenly turned sideways, and then dodged the oncoming breath. At this time, Lin Yu's face had a rare dignified look. He half squinted his eyes, and then he gently rubbed his chin, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth was even more intense. It was gradually revealed. It's interesting. It's really interesting. What I didn't expect is that there are actually people like this who don't know how to live or die. Lin Yu's voice was a little cold, and his face was full of gloom. After the blood-killing aura emerged from Lin Yu's body, even the Eternal Thunder Dragon felt that aura. I couldn't help but feel a bit of fear. The Eternal Thunder Dragon glanced at Lin Yu subconsciously, with quite a bit of fear in his eyes. You. After Lin Yu heard what Eternal Thunder Dragon said, he just waved his hand casually, and then smiled like this. It's nothing, don't take it to heart, don't take it to heart. Lin Yu just whispered like this, and the smile at the corner of his mouth gradually became more obvious. For some reason, the Eternal Thunder Dragon always had a bad feeling in his heart after seeing the smile on Lin Yu's face at this moment, and then he subconsciously moved towards Lin Yu. Take a look. What do you mean? Do you know that if that guy dares to spy in secret, it proves that that guy is very, very strong? The Eternal Thunder Dragon said in a deep voice, and then turned his head, staring directly at Lin Yu, and his expression couldn't help but twitch slightly. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Eternal Thunder Dragon said, the smile on the corner of his mouth gradually became apparent, and then he waved his hand casually. I have everything, so you don't have to worry. The person who was spying in the dark at this time seemed to feel the gloomy aura on Lin Yu's body. At this moment, he just took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. Then his face became slightly ugly. The man was breathing heavily, and the corners of his eyes and brows were full of alien disbelief. How is that possible? It was just a look. Just a look made me feel like I was about to be killed. Who is this person? How can he be so scary? The man took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. After pondering for a moment, he shook his head. No matter what, this matter is not important anymore, it is not important anymore. At this time, the man spoke softly like this, with a bit of panic flashing between his eyebrows and his eyes. At this time, the young man's nether bear seemed to feel the vigorous momentum of the young man, just in this breath, just in this brief moment, and then followed by that overwhelming force. Soared into the sky suddenly, and after everyone felt the overwhelming momentum, they were instantly impressed by it. Almost in the blink of an eye, the momentum of the wild wave made everyone's hearts tremble. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he nodded with satisfaction. The smile on the corner of his mouth gradually became more obvious. At this time, he just rubbed his chin so gently. Interesting, it's really interesting. This little guy seems to be quite capable. Lin Yu said in a deep voice, a bit of desolation flashed in his eyes, and a gloomy aura began to gradually spread out. That bit of vitality made everyone feel a gloomy feeling in their faces instantly. After a moment, Lin Yu also half closed his eyes. Interesting, this little guy is really interesting. Now, let's not mention anything else, just the unyielding spirit in this little guy is worth cultivating. Now, when Lin Yu looked at the man, his eyes were full of appreciation. At this time, the smile on the corner of Lin Yu's mouth gradually became clearer. The Eternal Thunder Dragon seemed to be aware of Lin Yu's admiration for this little guy, so he turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu. Although you appreciate that little guy enough, don't you think that the aura that this little guy has now is a bit The eternal thunder dragon paused when he said this. Although he did not continue to speak, the meaning was obvious.